With baseball on the verge of canceling games due to a labor-induced dispute, now seems as good of a time as any to revisit the sport's most famous work, stoppage. That's right, talking about the strike-shortened season of 1994. There were a lot of interesting things that happened in the season, which technically doesn't even count, and we're going to take a look at a few that maybe you don't necessarily remember from that year. Now, this was the first season Major League Baseball had 6 divisions, and it's a structure that we know and love today, but was really unique and different at the time. Of course, one of the things you probably do recall about this and about the sport at the time was the Montreal Expos, the now defunct Montreal Expos, were actually leading the NL East at the time the season was canceled. Of course, there were a lot of other things happening in 1994 that people probably do recall to this day. Firstly, Alex Rodriguez would make his big league debut for the Seattle Mariners in 94. You had Tony Gwynn flirting with 400. He was batting in the 390s when the season was canceled. And perhaps most impressively of all was a spry 35-year-old Julio Franco in the middle of his seemingly never-ending career in 94. And perhaps most notably, 1994 saw Matt Williams within striking distance of Roger Maris and the then single-season home run record of 61. He was on pace to tie that number. Of course, we'll never know what may or may not have been. The strike-shortened 1994 MLB season is undoubtedly the sport's biggest what-if. There were so many storylines and so many potential records being broken and things that we may never see again happening in that year, which makes it really sad it was called off. But beyond that, 1994 had a bunch of other crazy stuff going on in the world of baseball, and that is what we're looking at today. Here are 5 things you may not remember about the 1994 MLB season. Darryl Strawberry in a Giants uniform is definitely something that I think a lot of baseball fans probably don't remember happened, and it happened in 1994. This was not a great time for Strawberry in general. Prior to the season starting, he told the LA Dodgers about his drug problem, and they sent him to the Betty Ford Clinic for rehab, and he was there pretty much throughout spring training and in the up into the early stages of the season. Eventually, it was concluded that Darryl would be better served playing somewhere else. At Los Angeles, there's just too much stuff going on, and it wasn't great for his rehab. So the Dodgers just gave him an outright release in May of that year. The San Francisco Giants found themselves under 500 despite that epic season for Matt Williams. Needing a spark, they turned to Darryl Strawberry, who they would sign in July. The Simpson star played 29 games for the Giants that year, and he didn't really do a whole lot, although the Giants did go 17-10 with him in the lineup. All things considered though, and even going back and looking at it today, just seeing Strawberry in a Giants uniform is just, it's one of those things it's hard to process for sure. The 1994 strike robbed us of a likely sub-500 division champion. Now, this is something that we see quite a bit in football, especially with the 8 division format, but in baseball, it is unheard of for a division winner, or a playoff team for that matter, to finish under 500. When the strike officially happened and the season was called off, the Texas Rangers were leading the AL West with a not so impressive record of 52-62. Behind them in the standings on 63 losses were the A's and the Mariners. While not impossible, the most likely outcome of the 1994 season would have been a sub-500 champ in the AL West and a sub-500 playoff team. This would have been a terrible look for Bud Selig and Major League Baseball, who were trying to justify more playoff spots with the introduction of the wild card, because 1994 would have, in theory, been the first year of the wild card. To this day, we have never seen a sub-500 team reach the postseason in baseball. However, the 2005 NL West champion San Diego Padres did come close, finishing with a record of 82-80. Man, remember when stolen bases were a thing in baseball? So in 2021, there were a grand total of 5 players who stole 30 or more bases. And of course, they needed a full 162 game season to do so. In 94, 10 players accomplished that feat and stole 30 bases, needing 50-ish games less to do it. Among the pros to have swiped 30 or more bags before the 94 season was canceled were Deion Sanders, Kenny Lofton, personal favorite Otis Nixon, and even Hall of Famer Craig Biggio. (1994) was the last year of baseball in Mile High Stadium, despite the venue actually opening as a baseball-specific venue in 1948. Of course, as we know, the Broncos would move in 1960 with the launch of the AFL, and it would be a dual-purpose stadium hosting both the Broncos and Denver's AAA franchise up until 1993. That, of course, is when Denver landed itself a Major League Baseball franchise. By this time, of course, Mile High was no longer up to the standards Major League Baseball had desired, and the Rockies were building the new Coors Field, but required a place to play for those first 2 seasons, and that meant Mile High Stadium. The Rockies weren't very good in their expansion and their year after expansion season, but the fans did not seem to care at all. Colorado set the single season Major League Baseball attendance record in 1993 and were on pace to break that once again in 1994 until, you guessed it, the strike happened and the season was canceled. Kevin Mitchell is awesome, and 1994 was a renaissance season for the player who once told the press he was too big to wear a cup, whatever that could mean. The thing I always liked most about Mitchell, and really just baseball in that late 80s, early 90s, really up into the strike, is just how players were not only great, but they could also be just wildly unprofessional. In Mitchell's case, though, that did catch up to him later on when he was out drinking and partying, and managers sort of grew tired of waiting on him to pull out these spectacular one-handed, barehanded catches. Really, after his second All-Star season in 1990, it looked like Mitchell was hellbent on just partying himself out of the league. And then 94 came along and Mitchell appeared reborn with the Cincinnati Reds. He swatted 30 dingers, drove in 77 runs, and hit a robust .326 for the Reds that year. It looked like the 1989 MVP was back in full effect, even if the strike did prevent baseball from finishing that season. That really wasn't the case though. With uncertainty surrounding the 1995 season, Mitchell opted to play in Japan that year, but got injured almost upon his arrival in the country. He would return stateside in 96-97, but didn't really do anything on his return to Major League Baseball, and eventually he'd retire in 1998. That does it for our look at the 1994 strike-shortened season, and those things you may not remember, Let us know what your fondest memory of from a season and a time in baseball that is remembered quite hostily by a lot of fans for a fairly good reason. Anyway, that does it for me. I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and hashtag take it out to the 25.